couple weeks back, the latest David Fincher thriller, The Killer, dropped in theaters, though in very limited release, and this weekend it drops on Netflix. So let's talk about it. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies and TV way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section. Share your thoughts on The Killer and David Fincher. Now, I would say David Fincher is one of the top working directors today. He doesn't make movies that are like ones I just rewatch all of the time, but he makes movies that I thoroughly enjoy when I do rewatch them. I was about to say they're very pleasant films to watch. They're usually the opposite of very pleasant films to watch, but they're so entertaining while being heavy at the same time and exploring interesting ideas. And with this film, he's returning to a genre that he's tackled before, but he's never really made a movie like this before. It's actually based off of a French comic book, which is something I didn't realize. I knew it was an adaptation, but I didn't realize it was actually technically a comic book movie, which was kind of a fun detail. And so I was so excited to check this one out because it's a great director doing a genre that he does a great job with. Now, when I first heard about the movie and I heard David Fincher was making a movie called The Killer, I thought he was doing a remake of the John Woo movie because I'd heard rumors that they are doing an American remake of The Killer, and they've been talking about that actually for a very long time. That's not what this is. I would have loved to see what that would have been. But what we did get is another David Fincher film, but it's another great David Fincher film. Let's get started with the good. And no point beating around the bush, it is another solid David Fincher thriller. In a lot of ways, it's one of his more straightforward films. While it's totally different from Panic Room, I feel it's kind of similar to it in that both of them have very straightforward plots where the narrative, the objective of our lead character is very clear from the beginning, and it plays forward in a linear fashion as we're kind of tracking through it. We know exactly where we're headed. Well, they're very, very different films. And what this movie does so well is that it really puts us in the mind and the life of this killer. In that regard, it actually reminded me a good bit of American Psycho. Now, tonally, they're totally different. This is not a dark comedy. Our killer here is not Patrick Bateman, but both of them have this ongoing voiceover and these characters that are killers, or at least one of them think they're a killer, and they have this detached view of the world. They're discussing doing all these things that all of us do, but with a certain detachment. And so it was kind of reminiscent, while not at all being like American Psycho, but having a bit of a flavor in the point of view of the film. And so when you put these kind of two ideas together, that it is very much first person from his perspective, but also telling this linear narrative, you're right there in this day where a killer goes on a job and things go wrong and he has to clean up the mess. So we slowly discover his world, his process for doing a job. What is a flavor of his life outside of being on the mission? And then what does he value? How did he get into this? What does all of this look like? It kind of takes you through this process. And the film is broken up into chapters. And so it's just kind of like you see these little episodes. They're all like it makes sense as we go from one to the next one, but it breaks it up real kind of nicely as you see each of these kind of play out. And it almost creates a scenario where you could imagine a situation where this would have worked as an 8-episode or 7-episode, I don't remember how many chapters there were, miniseries, which each one of these anecdotes being an episode of the season of The Killer. And just a new objective, a new conflict, a new resolution in each one of these chapters. And so you have a payoff every 20 or so minutes to each chapter of the story. And it kind of gives it a nice pace. And part of what I enjoyed about it is that because it keeps doing that, it leaves you on the edge of your seat. At the beginning, where we're just dropped right in the middle of this mission, it starts really slow, but you also know you're waiting for the explosion. You're waiting for something to go down. And then it goes down and you're like in the rush of the moment. So from the beginning, you're waiting for it to happen. And then you're, oh, how are we going to get out of this? And by the time we get out of this, it introduces the next conflict. And it kind of keeps that pattern where each conflict is being resolved and it overlaps the next one as you go into it. So it never really lets up until the final minutes of the film as it resolves it. And it does it at just the right amount where it's not unbearable tension, but a tension that you enjoy because there's just enough release at the end of each chapter as we start the next conflict, the next one. Likewise, in each episode, we see how he works. So he'll go to the store and he'll buy something and you're like, what is he going to do with that? Oh, what's he going to do to this person? Oh, what's that person going to do to him? And it just keeps making these little opening these curiosity loops where you're like, oh, what's this? And then as soon as one gets answered, it kind of raises another question. He does something unusual. He buys something, he checks an email and you go, what's that about? What's he doing here? Once again, pulling you into the world of this killer with everything that he's doing. And so just real nice. It's not an action movie. It's very much a thriller. There's one great fight in it where it's just like very visceral. Two very different fighters with two very different advantages, both of them kind of underestimating the other person, and each of them using their advantage relentlessly to try and destroy the other person. It's just one of these fights where you're like, the whole thing, not stylized, not choreographed, just this brutal one between two people that are incredibly deadly in two very different ways. So it's really just the one action sequence. Otherwise, it is this thriller about building tension and then releasing it, building curiosity, then paying it off. That's the type of movie that you're in for. It's about this one guy. It's not like a deep character study, but he's an interesting character that you want to see how he works, what his world is like, and explore it on this very simple, straightforward narrative. And as for that, I thoroughly enjoyed the movie that he delivered. And I don't know if I'll even go into call these bad things, but would say that, like, in terms of David Fincher films, when you're dealing with a great director, even his lower films are still really good. And what distinguishes mid-tier Fincher from like top-tier Fincher is that he's just made some movies that are thrilling, entertaining, also very complex and thematically layered. And so they have all the stuff that this movie has, but they also have a lot more. So they just have this more robust experience than I had with this film. This film, he delivered a great thriller that I enjoyed. I got what I wanted out of it. But when I think of like top tier Fincher, these are movies that are great on so many different levels. This one's a little simpler. It's not quite as deep as top tier Fincher, and it feels like one that didn't leave it like as big of a mark. Like certain movies he does, and it's just like, wow, that was cool. Wow, that stood out. And of his movies, I feel like this one and Panic Room, as I referenced before, they're more straightforward genre films. Genres I enjoy. These are both movies I give very positive reviews to, but they're a little bit more straightforward, a little bit more films that you feel a little bit like perhaps someone else could have made this movie. That doesn't make them bad, but when comparing to his other films, this feels a little bit like lower mid Fincher for me. So make of that what you will. I got what I wanted out of this thriller about a killer where you're just very present with him on this mission to clean up a mess. And it did exactly what I hoped it would do, but don't go into this expecting Seven, Fight Club, or whatever your favorite is. You could go in many different directions for your favorite Fincher film. I don't think it has the layers of some of those ones. Let me know what you thought about it down below. I will be doing updated Fincher ranking this weekend. As for this movie, if you're a David Fincher fan, of course, go watch this movie. Whether if you can see it in the theater, I would recommend doing that just to support the film. Otherwise, check it out on Netflix. If you like Fincher, I would imagine that you will enjoy this film. Overall, I'm gonna give this one a B+ on the entertainment scale and 8 out of 10, and this is a movie that you should see if you are a Fincher fan, or if you like thrillers, if you like Hitman movies, if you like Michael Fassbender. Any one of these deals, it's a movie worth watching. Not best of the year type stuff, but a solid thriller I do recommend. Come back this weekend for my Fincher ranking and keep talking movies and TV too much. Bye-bye.